Hey folks, and welcome back to the channel. It is time for our regularly scheduled Liquid humiliation ritual. We every now and then come together and talk about the woe that is Team Liquid, but this time around, maybe there is a light at the end of the tunnel. Maybe there's something positive to look out for this team, as they have made two really big changes to the team to kick off this second season of 2026, and that is, of course, that they have benched their in-game leader siuhy, as well as their AWPer ultimate, and they have signed JT and Jorko to round out the roster. So it is a huge move on from two of the most important roles in the game, with the IGL and the AWPer being swapped out. It's also reuniting JT and Elite, who obviously played together on Complexity for about a year and a half, like 2023 through the end of 2024. And so, yeah, there's a lot of variables in play here, and we'll discuss it all as we usually do with these roster move videos. But before we dig deeply into it, folks, if you have not already, I'd appreciate if you could subscribe to the channel. We have already blown past our 6,000 subscriber goal by about 100 and something additional subscribers. We moved pretty quickly after we crossed the 6,000 barrier. So just looking to keep the channel growing. Obviously, the next really big goal would be trying to hit 10,000 subscribers. Not sure that's really possible to do before the end of 2026. Maybe we get like 7,500 or something like that. We'll have to see. But either way, I'd appreciate your support. If you're already subscribed to the channel, you can still support by leaving a comment, liking the video. Of course, you can use the hype feature on the YouTube mobile app, which helps with the algorithm, ring the bell, you know, all the YouTuber things, right? Every YouTuber you watch has asked you to do these things 1,000 times. I'm just adding on to the list. So I'd really appreciate your support in that regard if you can. So with all that stuff out of the way, let's dig into this one, as these moves for Liquid have been playing out over the last few weeks. I mean, ever since they exited the Cologne Major, you already had some rumors rumbling around because people noticed that JT was playing Face-It games with the Legion and a couple other guys. And so there was already, you know, some rumors out there really kind of leaning that direction. You know, obviously JT and Leech had played together before on Complexity, so the relationship was already kind of there, and we'll get into that a little bit later. But yeah, this change was definitely needed. The benching of Ultimate and then the addition of Jorko obviously came first, and then the announcement for JT just took a while, right? I mean, so much so that Blast had announced JT as being on Team Liquid's roster for the Blast Bounty event. It's playing out right now before Liquid had the chance to make their official announcement about JT on social media and stuff like that. So this has been kind of a drawn-out process, but this is the conclusion. That is that Liquid have made two major changes, changing two of the most important roles you can on a team, which is the IGL and the primary AWPer, by bringing in JT and Jorko. And so we'll kind of start like we always do, in the sense, you know, why did Liquid need to make this move? And I mean, that should be pretty obvious, right? Liquid's results lately have been absolutely terrible. I mean, this year has been awful. Most events, they are either placing literally dead last or just outside of being dead last. I mean, it has been absolutely pitiful what Liquid has been up to, you know, getting knocked out of stage 1 of the IM Cologne Major, 9th to 12th place at CAC, IM Atlanta, and Blast Open Rotterdam, dead last at IM Rio, and then obviously they had that 7th to 8th place finish at Draculand. So it has been a rough year. And really, if you even go back to last year, obviously things really weren't that much better. You know, they did make stage 3 from stage 2 at the Budapest Major, but didn't do anything after that. Finished dead last in stage 3, and then really just had a bunch of other results that just really weren't, you know, living up to what Liquid's trying to be as still one of the biggest brands in esports. And really, before, when Liquid was having bad results, let's say the first half of 2025, you could almost cope, because they were at least losing to elite level teams. You know, when you look at the first season of 2025, when they were getting knocked out of tournaments, they're getting knocked out by Spirit, knocked out by Vitality, knocked out by Mouseforce. So they're losing teams that are title contenders and top 5 teams in the world. And so you can almost kind of cope like, oh yeah, the result's bad, but look who they lost to, right? And that would kind of be a way for you to almost, you know, just deal with it and kind of move on. But the reality is when you look at this year, that ain't the case anymore, folks. They got knocked out of Draculand by fucking siuhy. You are Team Liquid. You're one of the biggest brands in esports. You have one of the biggest budgets probably of anybody, and you're losing to fucking siuhy in a Draculand. Okay, so we'll just leave that at that. Then they got knocked out of Rio by 3D Max, a team that they had a lot of success in the past, and a team that's really struggling in their own right. Right, you're losing to what was a struggling Astralis at IM Atlanta. Yeah, they were hot kind of the first part of 2026, the first few tournaments that they played in, but they really tapered off towards the end, so much so that they were really looking to make dramatic moves in their own, you know, right. So yeah, just kind of keep that in mind. And then when it comes to stage 1, the IM Cologne Major, they lost to fucking FlyQuest. FlyQuest. You know, again, this is a team that really struggles to do anything internationally. right? Oceania has always been a region that has really struggled. And when you really just think about kind of the history of Team Liquid versus different iterations of FlyQuest over the years, you usually would take Liquid to win those matchups. And so it was pretty crazy to see Liquid really have that struggle. So essentially, no more coping. The results are just shit, and they really needed dramatic change. And so we'll kind of talk through these changes, I guess, in chronological order. And we'll start with the fact that they decided to bench Ultimate to bring in Jorko. And this just seemed like a pretty obvious move that Ultimate needed to go. He had long overstayed his welcome. Remember, folks, this guy was on Team Liquid for 2 years. He joined in July of 2024 and has been there, up until his benching just, about a week ago as I'm recording this video, maybe even less than a week, right? So he was there for 2 solid years. That is much longer than a lot of different people who've come through Team Liquid. Like, obviously, some of the classic names, like a Nitro, like an Elige, like a Twist, a Dren as a player and a coach. There are definitely some names that, lasted longer and are a little bit more synonymous with the Team Liquid brand. But yeah, Ultimate was there longer than Hiko, who was widely known as being a Team Liquid member. Obviously, he was known for his helmet complexity at Cloud9 as well, but Liquid was kind of the other big team that he was a part of in CSGO. And so, yeah, Ultimate outlived Hiko in that regard. So really, really crazy stuff. And look, I'm not going to rewrite history. When Ultimate first joined the team, there was a lot of skepticism right away because he did come from complete obscurity, right? He wasn't one of the names that people were kind of touting up as, this tier 2 opera that could make a rise. Obviously, a name like Maladoy was kind of passed around. He obviously kind of gets his chance over on Furia. Grix was kind of another name. Of course, now he's over at Big Clan. And so there were a couple of names that were kind of, passed around, I guess you could say, but Ultimate wasn't one of them. But what I will say is when he first joined Team Liquid, the first few events that he played, like Blast and a couple other events, he actually did look really good out of the gate. Like the first 3 or 4 events he played for Team Liquid, it was like, okay, this guy's an aggressive playmaking opper, had a decent rifle as well, would go for a lot of openings on the T side, would really kind of assert himself, very flashy. You're like, all right, this is finally something for Team Liquid. Because if you think about it, Liquid has had an absolutely awful track record for oppers, bro. Like the opping thing over at Liquid has been plaguing them ever since they were a part of Counter-Strike, in all honesty, folks. I mean, other than Simple being on the team for like 3 to 4 months, at one point in time, they have never had an elite opera on this team, bro. So much so that Nitro was opping out of necessity as an IGL, he wasn't really meant to be a primary opper. And then even when they eventually got like Stewie 2K on the team, they were starting to do some stuff in 2019. They were actually rotating the op between Nitro, Stewie, and NAF depending on the map. Like I think Stewie was opping on Mirage, NAF would op on Inferno, Nitro is kind of taking up the op on pretty much the rest of the map pool. Like, Liquid does not have a good history with oppers. I mean, it's just really poor, right? And so Ultimate just kind of adds to the list of oppers who have struggled on this Team Liquid organization. And yeah, it's just a long time coming. Yeah, he started out hot, but he really kind of tapered off. He was really just a hit or miss opper. Like, you would see the magical moments. You would see, for instance, like the Mouse Sports game at the Blast Austin Major, where he nearly helped rescue Liquid and keep them advancing in that tournament and knocking out Mouse Sports. That was a crazy highlight moment for him, for sure. But for every highlight moment that he also had some real stinkers in the background where he was really not having any impact at all. It was really kind of a burden on the AWP, right? The most recent moment of this is obviously he had that jumping deagle shot on Nuke that everyone's going to remember. And no, that wasn't like some skill-based thing. Everybody knows that I was extremely lucky and the chances of hitting that shot were crazy, crazy low. But that is the thing that you're going to remember in your mind about that game. He dropped a .71 rating that game and they won that map, by the way. So that's just kind of another example of what I'm getting at here is that, yeah, for every time that you felt like he was doing something promising, he was really struggling in a lot of different areas. And so, yeah, moving on from Ultimate makes a lot of sense. Now, can Ultimate go somewhere else and maybe do something with his career? Is this another situation where your time on Liquid doesn't count and maybe on a different environment with different leadership and things of that nature, he could, course correct and develop more as a player? It's certainly possible. I'm certainly willing to admit that is definitely something that could happen for him. It goes back to, Europe and plays with the European, mixed team or something along those lines, or goes into a Polish lineup. Maybe he could do some cool stuff. I don't really know. But yeah, his time needed to end. Now, the signing of Jorko is an interesting one. And because, look, I get that he's, young, 17 years old, very inexperienced, but an opera that a lot of people have been touting is an up-and-coming figure to really keep an eye out on. Definitely not as obscure of a target as Ultimate was when Liquid signed him. This is a guy whose name has been kind of passed around. He's even played a few bigger events with that focus team, like he played PGL Bucharest earlier this year, for example. And so at least he's a name that people have tossed around. He's not totally obscure, right? And I do think that I've seen some positive things out of Jorko, pre-focus and during his time on focus, but he is an opper that is a little bit streaky, right? I mean, when I was watching him play for Focus at PGL Bucharest, he had some bright moments, but he also had some real stinkers as well. And that's to be expected. He's 17. He doesn't have a lot of experience. I think the only LAN that he had played before he joined Focus was a LAN with that Ill Will kind of mixed team that was playing some smaller events there for a time. I think he played an event with them maybe towards the end of last year or something like that. And then all of his other LAN play has basically been in the last 3 to 4 months with Focus. So yeah, he's a very raw player in that regard, but shows some promise. My issue is this, is as I've already mentioned, Liquid has a horrible track record with AWPers. Is it just going to continue with another young up-and-coming guy who comes to this team, as many other young up-and-coming AWPers have struggled on this team, right? There just seems to be a fucking curse in the water or something for Team Liquid where they just can't handle AWPers, right? And then secondly, forget his role. Is Liquid really the place to develop a young up-and-coming player? Because I don't think so. Like, I don't feel like Liquid has the right infrastructure to be developing a young, inexperienced player. Liquid is a team that has, you know, a lot of buying power usually, and so you feel like you need to bring an already established name who already kind of knows how to play the role at a high level, and that you don't really have to worry about. Someone who's more self-sufficient, I think, is probably the better pick, but beggars can't be choosers here. I'm sure Liquid didn't really have a whole lot of options at this point in time. I mean, we know that the opting market is rough right now, just in general for everyone, and let's face it, even though Liquid can offer a pretty competitive salary, I'd imagine, it's not like people are, you know, chomping at the bit to go over to a Team Liquid team that has clearly been a sinking ship for a long time at this point. So maybe they couldn't go get a bigger name. But look, other names that I wish they could have gotten, like Martinez going over to Heroic, that would have been a good pickup. Honestly, Sun Pius might have been a good pickup, even though he wasn't great for G2. Again, beggars can't be choosers. At least he's an experienced guy. He's somewhat self-sufficient. You know what you're going to get. Like, maybe something like that could have worked out. I don't know. I think Jorko obviously will go on to be a better opper than Sun Pius skill-wise, in my opinion, sure. And so if this winds up being the right match, it could turn out, you know, swimmingly, I guess, for Team Liquid. But the reality is that I just am concerned about Liquid's history with AWPers, and I'm also concerned that, do they really have the right leadership on this team to be able to help a young AWPer develop and become a better player and learn the ropes and all that stuff. I just don't really know. I feel like Jorko might kind of get fed to the sharks in that regard, where it's kind of sink or swim. Hopefully you can figure it out. You know, there's so many other things that Liquid have to worry about that I just don't know how this is going to go. I don't know Flashy as a coach and how he works developing players. I'm not sure how JT is going to help this guy develop. Like, I just don't know, right? Even though there are some positives about JT as an IGL, I just don't know if he's going to be able to help out an AWPer. I don't know. We'll have to see. But obviously, the opping role did need a change. Obviously, Jorko is a young up-and-coming prospect. So in those regards, you know, it could work out, but there are certainly some concerns there. Not Jorko's fault by any stretch of the imagination. Now, for the big change, it is the benching of siuhy to bring in JT. And look, my thoughts on siuhy are really nuanced, because on the one hand, I'm not going to rewrite history. The guy was a fantastic young up-and-coming IGL during his time with the Mouse Academy team, then going over to Gamer Legion, helping them reach the grand finals of the Paris Major in 2023. And then obviously he had a huge 2024 when he returned back to the Mouse Sports organization as the in-game leader of the main team, alongside, you know, fellow Academy members that Mouse had promoted to the main team. And in 2024, under siuhy's leadership, that team went on to become a top 5 team in the world, to win a couple of trophies, including like a season of EPL against top competition. Even one of the Bet Boom Dachau events that they won, I believe their win the grand finals was over Spirit, right? Which was a really good team. So they had some legit trophies in the cabinet, and they were very consistently ranked in the top 5, and deservedly so, right? So he clearly has had a lot of success as an IGL. He has put together a really good resume for a young guy. I mean, remember, when he was helping lead Gamer Legions at the grand finals of the Paris Major, at that point in time, he would have been like 19, 20 years old. Obviously, you know, during his time on Mouse Sports 2024, he was like 21. He's only 23 now, right? So he's still very young in his career, and he could still go on to do great things after he's left Team Liquid. He could go on to another international roster and perhaps, you know, do some good work with the right environment around him. So I'm not going to completely say that siuhy is worthless, siuhy, you know, is not worthy or anything like that. Like, no, he's had a good resume up until his put on Liquid, but I'm also not going to totally absolve him of any blame for how Liquid operated while he was the leader of this team. And it is true that due to how Liquid struggled with him as leader of this team, his stock has plummeted. Deservedly so or not, that's kind of up to you. But my thought is this, like, I do think siuhy has a great past. I do think he could still have a bright future, but his time on this team was not great, right? First of all, let's just talk about individual skill level, right? Before the Cologne major, where Kerrigan went on to lead Falcons to, a title and give Nico his first major and all the great storylines around that, heading into that major, the talk around Kerrigan was that his rating was just so crazy low, right? Even if he was such a great magician as an IGL in the mid-round in particular and all these great things that he brings to the table as a leader, people were debating whether or not his fragging was just far too low to be able to cover for it, right? Now, Falcons obviously is one of the exception teams that can cover it because they just have so much skill across the rest of the players on the team, but it was still a talking point, right? And his rating going into that major was a 0.83. I think once he finished the major, his rating right now, I think it's like a 0.80 at this point in time. But it was a 0.83 going into the major. So all this time with FaZe where they were really struggling, including playing some smaller events and things of that nature where you think he could kind of pad some stats, yeah, he was a 0.83. It was really, really poor. You want to know what Siuhy's rating was for 2026 with Team Liquid? It's a 0.85, 0.02 better. And they played some small tournaments against some small teams too. Again, remember, they lost to Stashi to Draculan. So individually, not really putting up the numbers, right? And then look at last year. If you look at Siuhy's time on Liquid in 2025 and the rating that he had while he was on Liquid, and you compare that to Kerrigan on FaZe, obviously different situations. Kerrigan was on a team that he had been on a long time. But still, Kerrigan had a 0.87 rating, I think, for 2025 with FaZe, and Siuhy's rating was a 0.89. So again, still only 0.02 better. So individually, he was struggling. And let's just forget about the raw numbers. When you do the eye test and you watch Siuhy's time on Team Liquid, the guy inted like no other for so many games, bro. I actually did a whole video about this, about the Budapest Major at the end of 2025, where I looked through some replays of Team Liquid and just showed how much of a disorganized mess they truly were. They were not a cohesive unit, right? They really looked poor in every stage of the round. They did not look on the same page. People were trying to make hero plays by themselves where no one was around to trade them. The supportive utility wasn't there. The timing was always kind of off on how they scaled for map control or executes. Like their T-slides looked absolutely horrendous the vast majority of the time. And the reality is, Siuhy was a huge part of that in two different senses of the word. So the first way it was a problem was he was one of the guys that would sometimes just go for these crazy Hail Mary plays by himself. He would just go out there and take a huge fight, as a CT on Banana or as a T on mid or something like that on Inferno, just to use that map as an example. Like, this guy was going for crazy hero plays by himself in 5-on-5s and 4-on-4s and just throwing his life away. Or just going for weird plays that didn't matter. Like, there was one round for the Budapest Major, again, that's in this video, I'll link in the description below, where there was a round where they were taking mid-control and Mirage. They had a good, amount of map control. They had good numbers going their way. And then Siuhy just goes up connector by himself into A and dies. No one was there to trade him. There was no supportive utility. There was so many instances like this, right? So I do have to question his individual decision-making as a player. And then look, the second way to look at it is he is supposed to be the in-game leader of this team. He is supposed to be the one in charge of those mid-round situations, and the team looked like an incoherent mess. They did. They lacked any sort of team player cohesion. So I want to run you through a couple of quotes that were given in interviews by Elige and other team members when he joined this team. So obviously he leaves FaZe at the end of 2025 and joins Team Liquid at that point in time. This is Elige we're talking about. And when he comments on his departure from FaZe, he mentioned that when he first joined the team, that it seemed like the team did want a new perspective of how to approach the game. He was talking to Kerrigan before he joined the team, and it seemed like they were on the same page about trying some new things that Elige liked to do, and, they were willing to give it a shot. But he said that, it felt like after about a month or so that pretty much these new ideas weren't wanted anymore. FaZe kind of wanted to go back to playing the way that they used to, and basically he just said that he tried to do the best he could do with what they wanted to do, and it just didn't work out. They were on the same page. They didn't want to approach the game the same way. Yada, 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 blah, blah, blah. We already kind of knew that, right? So when he first joins Team Liquid and they go to play CAC, he does an interview with HLTV in the middle of October where he says, on FaZe was on completely two opposite ends, where I think they were open to trying it in the beginning when I got picked up initially, but then it was just a little too different. Whereas here on Liquid, I think we're already speaking the same language. So he feels like they're on the same page how they want to approach the team, right? Then Nertz, when he was still playing alongside Elige, this is at the PGL Masters Bucharest event, this is just a little bit later in October, he says, the way Elige sees the game, I see it in the same way. Everything that he says, I completely agree with about the theory. And it's the same the other way around. If I say something, I feel like he agrees with it. So for me, we are aligned in the way that we see CS. So apparently they're all on the same page. They all believe that they should play CS the same way. They're speaking the same language. Everything's all hunky-dory, right? Doesn't turn out that way in the results. So then we go to the Budapest Major. And even though they struggled, Elige gives an interview to HLTV where he says, I think that our environment has been really good. Even at CAC, I was saying the same thing, as we already kind of pulled an interview from CAC. When we're talking about CS, we're all saying it in the same terms. were understanding the rounds in the same way, right? Then siuhy at Blast Bounty, when they're kicking off 2026 and they've had their off season to prepare and all that stuff. siuhy says, we've been working behind the scenes a lot. I think that Elige has a similar vision to the game as me, and so we're getting along pretty well when it comes to crafting new things and making sure that the system that we're building inside of the game that fits everyone, right? So, for months now, they're all supposedly on the same page. You're hearing it from Elige, you're hearing it from Nertz, you're hearing it from siuhy. Then Nertz, when he's at stake ranked in April of 2026, and he's left Liquid and he's joined G2, he says, I didn't have the best performance at Liquid. I feel like the bigger thing is about personality clashes during my time at Liquid. Overall, it's a clash of personalities. They only want two big voices on the team. Wait, you just said that everything was all hunky-dory and everything was on the same page, speaking the same language, everything's great. Now all of a sudden, Nertz has left the team, and he's saying that it's a clash of personalities. Didn't really work out. Too many voices. Then Elige at Rio, just a couple of weeks later, he says it was an overall team collapse. It's pretty much just back to the drawing board, like we need to start making proofs because it's pretty much the same story for most of the year, I'd say. Then after their stage 1 exit at the Cologne Major, so very recently, before all these moves happened, Elige says, I think it's been a bit of a roller coaster since joining Team Liquid, where I've had a lot of self-confidence issues. I'd say having a lot more doubts of myself and kind of building that back up while not trying to overstep, because there was a lot of different voices, a lot of different ideas of how we wanted to approach the game ever since I joined. What do you mean? You just said you were all on the same page, everything was hunky-dory. Now you're saying that everyone's different voices and a lot of different ideas how to approach the game? It always felt like whatever direction we went, we weren't fully going into it. So it kind of felt like a lot of wasted time in that regard. So you kind of see my point, folks. Like, on paper, we watched it. They look like a disorganized mess. They're claiming in interviews throughout the entire time that they're on the same page. They had the same theories. They're speaking the same language. But now, when it doesn't work out and everyone goes their separate ways, now all of a sudden it's too many voices, too many personality clashes. We kept going in different directions. We wasted a bunch of time. Who freaking knows, man? So while it's not all siuhy's fault, I'm sure other players on the team weren't maybe communicating properly or, weren't taking agency the way that they should have been. Again, siuhy can't just be the puppet master, mind controlling every single player on the server. Like, every other player on the team does have their own responsibility to make proper decisions, to communicate properly, to be on the same page with the team, things of that nature. So it's not all on siuhy. Some of it's also on the coaching staff who are helping prep the team and are supposed to be helping develop the team. And obviously Flashy's name is going to be under fire for what's happened so far since he's been the coach of this team. But to absolve siuhy of all blame, I think, is a step too far, right? Again, I understand the sentiment that some people have that, oh, look at what siuhy did on Game Religion. Look what he did on Mouse Sports. Yeah, his time on Liquid was horrible, but he could be one of those players where his time on Liquid doesn't count. And maybe he can move on and have a great career. All those things are true, by the way. He did have a great resume coming to Team Liquid. That's why Team Liquid hired him, because they were in a horrible situation. They needed new leadership, and they looked to siuhy, a promising, up-and-coming IGL talent who had done wonderful things with Mouse Sports throughout 2024 in particular. And for as much as we shit on Liquid's management and their decision-making, things of that nature, which, fair enough, that critique is certainly valid, picking up siuhy on paper looked like a slam dunk pickup for Team Liquid. Looked like a great move to make, actually, to bring in a new IGL to help usher in a new era for Team Liquid. Now, certainly the issue is that different culture, different environment. He didn't even have a coach when he first joined the team. Like, the order of operations for Liquid was certainly awful. Like, they didn't really have a leadership structure in place from the coaching staff side of things before they brought siuhy in, and that is definitely a weird one. Then Flashy eventually comes in, sure, but it was after already so much time had passed and so many things had rotted, right? So, yeah, it's one of those things where I can, on the one hand, appreciate what siuhy has already done in his career before Liquid, and I can also accept the fact that he could go on to do great things elsewhere and that, his career shouldn't be ruined because of this. But it's also unfair to just not, give him any blame for how awful Team Liquid looked like he was the IGL of this team. So this change did have to happen. Now, as far as JT coming into the team, this is probably about as good as it's going to get, right? I mean, the IGL market right now is very tough. You obviously weren't going to be able to go attract a name like Kixon, who wants to go into Aurora, which could be a top 5 team in the world, or, a top 8 team at the very least. So the names are slim pickings. And at least with JT, he is a guy who's done pretty good work with not that much talent on his roster. His most talented roster he's ever going to, lead is the one that he's about to right now at Team Liquid. He has had some names that were good. Obviously, he had Elige with him on Complexity. He had Grim, who was a solid player for him. Sonic was a solid player for him at times as well. Like, he's had some talented players, sure, but not to the same degree as that he's about to have now. And he was still doing some great things. Remember, when JT and Elige played together on Complexity, They had like a second place finish at IM Sydney. They had another really good finish at a season of EPL. So they've done some pretty cool stuff at times. Now, was it all, Sunshine Rainbows? No, they certainly had their moments where they struggled, which is obviously why they went their separate ways at a point in time. But they still show that they could do something together. And now this roster, linking this partnership back up with JT and Elige, but with more talent around, the two of them, there definitely could be some good things there, right? Like, I do have a lot of time for JT. Again, I think he's done pretty well as an IGL throughout the course of his career. I think even at this stage, he's one of the better guys fragging wise as an IGL. Like, his numbers aren't going to, leap off the page and really wow you or something along those lines. But certainly, I think his fragging is generally like average to above average for an IGL. For example, if you look at the lands that he has played so far in 2026 with Passion UA, he was just under a 1 rating. So, up there, pretty solid. For the entirety of 2025 when he was playing with Passion UA and Complexity, which, yeah, there were a lot of small events that kind of helped buff him, but at the Starlight Budapest major for Passion UA, he actually had a really high rating throughout the course of that major, just to give you an example. But his rating average for the year in 2025 was a 1.01. So that's pretty good for an IGL. So he frags at a pretty decent level for an IGL. I think he runs a more cohesive style of Counter-Strike. And I think that he is a guy that can come in and at least be solid. Now, look, 5 years from now, we could look back and Siuhy might have the better resume, right? So I'm not trying to say that JT greater than Siuhy, but I do think in this situation where Liquid was at the point they were at, where they looked like a mess, they needed to change the leadership. I do think someone like JT makes sense for this roster now because, again, you're not really going to get better if you're Liquid right now. Again, the IGL market's tough. You're not ranked very well. Yeah, you can offer an attractive salary and things of that nature, but you're not as big of a name as you used to be, the pecking order for players who are looking for teams and stuff, right? So I think this is kind of the situation just kind of makes sense for both parties in this regard. Now, will this fix everything is a big question, right? Because, again, can this, relationship between JT and Elige, can it work out? Now, one of the things to think about is that, coaching wise, JT has worked with TC pretty much his entire career. And there was talk that he wanted to bring TC with him on the scene. That might have been part of the reason why, his signing and announcement might have been held up a little bit. Now, at this point in time, as I'm recording this video, nothing has been said about the coaching situation. So we must just assume that Flashy is staying the coach of this team. Now, on the one hand, that could be seen as a negative because Flashy really hasn't done much yet with this team to make you believe that he is going to be a great coach. And he's kind of coming out of Blade's shadow where he was an assistant or an analyst or whatever the case may be on Na'Vi before taking this head coaching job, which is one of his first big head coaching jobs. I think he did obviously have another maybe head coaching stint when he was working with... was it CLG Red or FlyQuest Red, or the case may be? I know that he was, coaching that women's team that Goose Breeder's on, which was actually Elige's partner. That was FlyQuest Red, yeah, in 2023, where he was the head coach of that team, 2020 to 2023, actually. So that's actually how Elige and Flashy kind of already knew of each other, was because of that as well. So that's kind of maybe one thing to kind of look out for. But whatever the case may be, we still have yet to see what Flashy can do with the squad. I think the jury's kind of still out. I think that he can be judged now on this next move and what he can do with this team now. I think that will be a part of the equation. And as far as, JT breaking away from TC, look, maybe they have gotten the most they can out of each other. I mean, they've been there for so many years. I don't know how much more TC can push JT. Maybe a new coach ahead of JT will give him new perspectives, new options. Maybe it could be a good thing. Maybe at some point they do bring in TC. I don't know. But again, like, will this actually fix Liquid? Because Liquid have been struggling for years at this point, folks. I mean, they really haven't been a successful team since 2019. It has been a very long time since this team has done much. I mean, their last big result was, I guess, they did like a 5th, 6th place finish at IM Melbourne last year. But and then they had like a 3rd place finish or something at Twist last event at one of those Fisher Playground events. But that's really some of the best results they've had in years, right? I mean, obviously they were a huge team in 2019. We all know that, but it has been a long time since they've been successful. And so the question is, can these two changes actually fix this team? And the answer is, who freaking knows, bro? Who freaking knows? It depends on how Flashy does with this new set of players. It depends on how JT does with a new set of talent around him. It depends on, can everyone get on the same page? Like, there needs to be kind of a come to Jesus moment where everyone gets on the same page, in my opinion, for this to really work out. And, we've already kind of talked about some of the challenges that they're facing. And to kind of add on to that, right? New IGL, obviously, just how is that going to work out? How can he blend in with Team Liquid? Jorko, as a young, inexperienced AWPer, how is he going to be able to develop? Is Liquid the place where he can develop? You know, those are some big question marks, right? Then when you talk about some of the other names, look, Elise just had one of his worst seasons ever individually. Can he get back on track? Because he's supposed to be a super important aggressive rifler for this team. He's supposed to be a star player for this team. And he has, even in his time on FaZe where things went horrible, he still was one of the best entries in the world when you're just looking at raw entry output, the amount of opening attempts he was taking and how he was converting on those opening attempts on the T side. So he still could be a fantastic entry rifler, but can he get back to a star level, which is what this team needs, right? To be able to go out there and do something, right? Naf actually recovered his form after having one of the worst seasons of his career last year. So it seems like he's kind of back on the right track, but we'll just have to kind of see how that plays over time. And then Malbs, I got a lot of time for Malbs. And look, I do think that Malbs played some of his best Counter-Strike when he wasn't one of the featured guys. Like when he was playing behind Nico and Munacy and stuff like that on G2, and he was playing more anchor roles in the CT side when he wasn't the star featured player. You know, if he can kind of get back to that on CT sides and then be that second aggressive rifler next to Elige on T sides, I think there could be, you know, some good playmaking opportunities there still. But a lot is up in the air still. Liquid has been through so much over the years, and it's been awful for a long time, and it's just gotten worse and worse over time. Again, before you could cope that, yeah, the results were bad, they were losing to big teams. This past season, not the case at all. They're losing to teams they should not be losing to and continuing to have horrible results. So this is going to be a big change at Liquid. Will it fix things? I don't know. Will everyone go on and say their time at Liquid doesn't count afterwards and things will be better then? Who knows? But this is where we're at right now, and I've tried to assess it from all angles, and my conclusion is just like these moves could be promising. This could help get Liquid back in the right direction, but we thought the same thing about when siuhy was brought to this team due to his in-game leading ability coming into this team. We thought the same thing about Nurse, who was a 2023 Rookie of the Year, 2024 star player for Heroic, and then he comes over to Liquid and things don't work out, and it still hasn't worked out for him on G2 either so far, right? So maybe his time on Liquid does actually count. We'll have to see. So there's been so many other promising moves that Liquid have made that has not really panned out. Their history with AWPers is awful. So I don't really know. You know, I don't really know at the end of it all. I almost just kind of don't care anymore. And maybe they'll surprise me and be really good, and then I'll pay some attention. But if they kind of stay where they're at, then they'll just continue to be internationally irrelevant. So yeah, a little bit pessimistic, I guess, but I've just been dealing with Liquid for years at this point, and this is kind of just where I'm at now. I'm defeated, you know? But that's going to do it, folks, for this video. If you enjoyed it, again, please subscribe, like, comment, all that stuff, and I'll catch you on the next one.